Friends, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Bryan Garman, head of school, and it's my honor to welcome you to this evening's event. If we could gather, as is our way, after the manner of friends, with a moment of shared silence, please. Thank you, friends. It's wonderful to have you with us for the Daryl Reich Rubenstein Memorial Lecture, which is supported by a generous endowment gift from the family. We wish we could be together this evening and look at the art in the gallery as we normally do, but thanks to the wonderful work of Aaron Brophy, our middle school art teacher and the director of the gallery and exhibitions at the Sidwell Friends, we're very fortunate to have a terrific slideshow in place for you this evening, where you'll get an opportunity to look at the art and to hear from the wonderful Dr. Elizabeth Broun, also, who will help us learn how to look at the art. So we're very, very fortunate to have her with us tonight. In 1981, Lee Rubenstein, together with his children, Beth, Barton, and Amy, all of whom are Sidwell Friends alumni and all of whom are with us virtually this evening, established a fund to honor the memory of Daryl, Lee's late wife. Daryl was a curator to Smithsonian Institution, an art historian, and a major supporter of the arts in the district. She was also an active member of the Sidwell Friends community. She taught speech in the middle school, organized photography competitions, and curated exhibitions. Since the establishment of the program in Daryl's memory, more than 40 nationally recognized artists have visited the school to exhibit their work and spend time with our students and faculty. I want to thank the Rubensteins for their generosity and their support of the arts at Sidwell Friends. This is really a remarkable program, and I have always learned an enormous amount and been moved by the artists that you have been able to bring to Sidwell Friends, and I know that that's going to be the case this evening as well. I also want to thank Aaron again for his great work, and I want to thank our friends at Institutional Advancement, especially Gabriela Guerra and Rachel Hickman, for their work in supporting the program this evening. We're fortunate, as I mentioned earlier, to have a renowned and widely published scholar with us this evening, one who can help illuminate the emotionally stirring and socially conscious work of our visionary guest artist. One of the most accomplished leaders in the art world, Dr. Elizabeth Broun, has had a tremendously positive impact on how we experience art in the district. A former Ford Fellow at the Walters in Baltimore, she served as a director of the Smithsonian American Art Museum and the Renwick Gallery, spaces that she transformed into inviting and dynamic venues. Those of us who remember the Renwick Stade main parlor never imagined that we would have to wait in line to enter that beautiful building, which former First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy saved from demolition. As a former fellow at the Smithsonian, I used to visit that space at lunchtime and would sometimes nod off as I sat on those faded crushed velvet seats. Now the Renwick is one of the most interesting galleries in the district, where it hosts provocative traveling exhibits in addition to its traditional crafts collection. The dramatic transformation of the main gallery had everything to do with Dr. Broun's vision. I can remember visiting the Wonder exhibit when the gallery reopened and feeling gratitude and joy for the ways in which the building had been reimagined. Located in the former U.S. Patent Building, the American Museum saw a $250 million renovation under Dr. Broun's leadership. The museum is one of my personal favorites, not simply for its architectural history and beauty, but because it houses, thanks to Dr. Broun's commitment and vision, a remarkably diverse collection that chronicles and complicates our narrative about what it means to be a U.S. citizen. Art, she explains, is not always about pretty things. It's about who we are, what happened to us, and how our lives were affected. Dr. Broun, thank you for bringing that definition of art to life. Thank you for stewarding our public treasures so well, and thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much, Bryan Garman, for that lovely introduction. And thank you for highlighting that theme that art is often about who we are and how we came to be the nation that we are today. It's so relevant to the work we are going to be looking at today. I also want to thank Director of Exhibitions, Aaron Brophy. He did a wonderful job of coordinating today's program and getting all the ducks in a row and making everything happen on time. You are so smart and very fortunate to have Suzanne Brennan Firstenberg as your Rubenstein guest lecturer this year. She is a star. She is a national treasure. She is one of the rare artists in America who can actually work on a large public scale. Now, I know in today's world, a lot of artists are very interested to engage with important issues in our world. It's a period of our art history when artists are extremely socially engaged, rather as they were in the 1930s and 40s. But very few can tackle the depth of issues on the scale that Suzanne Firstenberg accomplishes. If you want to know how she sees the world, you can just go to her website. I love this statement on her website. She says, physically demanding, psychologically draining, creatively expansive, my kind of art. And indeed, it is physically sort of mind-boggling how she can achieve the vision that she has. The psychologically draining part has to do with the issues that she chooses to present. These are the issues that are most challenging to us. They're the ones that society wrestles with often futilely, and that we struggle to even grasp. It's hard to get our arms around it. And the creatively expansive part, well, that's where her genius comes in. She knows how to take those issues, the psychologically draining ones that are so difficult to grasp, and render them visually in a way that is transporting, that gives us at a glance a kind of deeper understanding. She understands the power of art to succeed in capturing an idea at the point when words have already failed us. So I find her to be, I was going to say a worthy successor to Christo and Jean-Claude, who similarly created art in the public sphere with people participating, engaged in every aspect of the art. But maybe, the fact that she is also a woman artist means I should cite her as a worthy successor to Maya Lin. I still remember the first time I saw the Vietnam Memorial, and I realized that every single fallen hero in Vietnam was recorded by name. So it was not only an evocation of seemingly endless war, but it was of each particular life that was committed to that cause. And in a similar way, Suzanne Firstenberg has found that for our current COVID crisis. So I could talk at length more and more, but I think we want to hear from Suzanne. So I'd like to turn it over now to her, and maybe we should start by talking about this image, the amazing, breathtaking image of the flags near the DC Armory. Suzanne?
Betsy, thank you so much. I mean, what an honor it is simply to be here, but to be introduced by you and to hear my name in the same sentence as Christo or Maya Lin. That's quite an honor, indeed. I think that you are right, that right now, the need to make art really step up and fill the void because words are no longer being heard is just critical. And I think in my art, you will see that theme throughout, where I take on topics where there's been a lot of discussion, but very little movement. And so I hope that we'll have a chance to talk about that tonight. But what a thrill it is for me. I mean, how often does an artist get to be in conversation with the director emerita of the nation's art museum? So thank you for that. To the Rubensteins, thank you so much. This is a real honor to be the guest artist. So thanks to you, Lee and Trina, and the whole family. Barton, your son, may not even be able to pick me out of a lineup, but 10 years ago, I actually had the opportunity to visit his artist studio. That was when I was on the board of the Washington Sculptors Group. And so I was intrigued by the fact that he had such a facility with sculpting in steel in particular. But what I left with was being so inspired by his having helped design the $100 bill. I mean, we're not talking about the dime or the dollar, but the $100 bill. So I still remember that, Barton. Many thanks to you, Bryan Garman, the head of the school. When I looked at the guest list and saw people coming on Zoom, I realized that my thoughts were indeed true. Sidwell is the center of the universe. And you have quite the family. So I'm honored to be able to talk with many of the people from that Sidwell family. And then before I forget, and before we talk about the art, I have to do one thing, and that is thank my own family. We will talk about this photo and this art installation I did last fall, but I couldn't have done it alone. Daryl, my husband, was right before a press conference actually buying and laying AstroTurf. My oldest daughter knew of my technological incompetence, and she took on the realm of social media for me. My other daughter made sure that I was appropriately dressed for all aspects of that event. And my son, well, he helped calm me a lot of times. And in fact, last night, as I was working at my computer, he heard me grumbling. He actually came over and helped me find where all my 30,000 emails are lurking that I thought had just gone off into the ether. So I guess as an artist, what I'm trying to say is we may feel alone in our art, in our process, but it usually takes a whole village. And so I just wanted to say thank you to my family. What you're going to see tonight is compliments of Erin Brophy, who's put all the visuals together for us so that Betsy and I can talk about the art that I have been presenting. Aaron brought his students last fall to this art installation at the DC Armory Parade Ground. He came and brought his technology and actually taught class from there. And then he did that again this spring. Last week, he did virtual field trips to my art studio, and the students could visit all sorts of pieces of art of mine. And they came up with some really great questions. So you do a good job there at Sidwell, I will say. So Aaron?
Hey, Suzanne, thank you for that. And the students really did enjoy getting a feeling for your work behind the scenes. You know, on the website and in our class discussions in the fall and the spring, you know, they didn't get to see your work in full. So those studio visits were great. And in a similar manner, I was going to play a short video clip so that our audience could also get a fuller view of your recent work. So we're going to start with a short video clip, and then I'm going to pass it back to Elizabeth and to you.
But choose any flag, and there's a story behind it. Jesse James Lowell. Lila Althea Fenwick, first Black woman to graduate Harvard Law. He died at age 40 and left behind 6 children. It just goes on and on and on. We've lost so much. I wanted to use art to explain to people the real depth and breadth of this tragedy. The number of deaths in America got so big, people were ignoring it in a way.
200,000 lives lost, 200,000 stories left unfinished.
Each one of these people mattered, and we had to find a way to bring all of that emotion into the understanding of the number. I chose flags because I wanted to have one unit for every person who had died, but I wanted it to have action. I wanted it to make noise. And flags, when they ripple in the wind, not only is there movement and beauty in that, but there's also sound. And I wanted to, in a way, bring to life this idea of those whom we've lost. I chose white for a few different reasons. First of all, people could write on them. So people could personalize a flag for the loved one whom they'd lost. But also, white individually signified purity and innocence. But on a whole, when you look at this immense field of white flags, that white really looked like what it was, and that is the flag of surrender by our government officials. I didn't want it just to be art that I made. We're all in this together. I had to have it be art that people came and helped me with. Each one of these bundles has 100 flags in it. We put approximately 1,000 flags into each of these boxes. So I bought 250 boxes. I began with $250,000 and then had to order twice more. And then we ran out of space.
when it had to come down because I ran out of space and time, and in my heart I really wanted to have the art continue in some way. And so I partnered with folks at GW University, and we've created a digitized version. So people can actually go onto this map and see the flags that were planted, and then add ones for those whom they've lost to COVID. People haven't been listening to words, and so visual artists really do need to step up and fill the void. I don't think we'll ever get over this, and I don't think there's any cliff. We need to make patriotism looking out for each other. And that's not on Biden, that's on us.
And so with that powerful clip from BBC, that was just one of many, many to choose from with all the attention that your work got. I wanted to just kind of throw it back to you and kind of ask about your inspiration for creating and cultivating this place of national mourning.
You know, Aaron, thank you for playing that. As an artist, I was becoming more and more determined to use art to speak to this topic from the beginning of the pandemic. For instance, I think it was in March, late March, when Dan Patrick, who was the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, suggested that the elderly should be willing to accept the risk of the virus because the economy was more important. And I thought, oh my God, I should send this guy the phone number of my mother, my elderly mother in Western South Dakota, and I should let him talk with her. I thought that that was such a devaluation of lives. I've been a hospice volunteer for 25 years, and that has taught me the value of every single life down to the last moment. So that first inspired me to somehow use art to speak to this issue. But then the true devaluation became even more apparent on a weekend in May. It was a weekend when our then president, Trump, decided to declare that he was done with the pandemic and he really wanted to become a, quote, cheerleader for the economy. That was the same weekend that CNN reported that communities of color were being disproportionately affected. And I thought, man, if that isn't racism, it's at least implicit bias. And that truly spoke to the devaluation of lives. So when August rolled around and there was a headline in the Washington Post that said 170,000 deaths was just a statistic, I thought, no, as a visual artist, I cannot let this be so. What was happening was the numbers were indeed growing so large in that cumulative death count in the US that people couldn't understand it, so it was easy to dismiss. And the last thing I wanted was for people to accept this, because this was not what I thought America should accept or could be. And so I wanted to help people understand what was happening. So I knew I needed to use a unit of some type so that I would have one unit representing each person who had died. I needed a place. And so I worked with officials in the DC government to identify a location, and the DC Armory Parade Ground was perfect. They would let me keep it up for several weeks. It was a contained oval. It had metro access, it had parking, and people could drive around the expanse of the art, but stay in their cars because people were very much wanting to still stay very much protected and socially distanced last fall. And so I chose this space. It took me 2 months to get approval. And in fact, I ordered those 250,000 flags weeks before I actually got the official approval. But that just shows you how determined I was to make this a reality. I will say that the design of it is important because I wanted to have the central section look like Arlington Cemetery, to be reflective of Arlington Cemetery. So I worked with Rupert Landscaping, and as you can see there, we planted the central array with using actual boards with holes cut in them to stick the flags in and then jimmy them up over the tops of the flags. Rupert Landscaping donated over 400 man hours in helping me plant these flags in the central array. We planted 165,000, and we created this array because I wanted people to appreciate the juxtaposition. Arlington Cemetery is where we honor those who have kept us safe. And this art installation was really honoring those whom we had not kept safe in this pandemic. Arlington Cemetery, by the way, while they say that they have 400,000 internments, many of those are doubled, often with husband and wife buried or interred together. And so they have about 270,000 headstones. When you look at this art, we ultimately, at the end of it, had just under 270,000 flags planted. So you can see, get an appreciation for the scale of this. It was important to me, though. Yeah.
Suzanne, was this the image that reminded you of Arlington National Cemetery, that kind of had that feeling?
Yes.
I just wanted to point it out because I was a little behind on this slide talk, and I thought it was a great point that you made.
Yes, that's the one where you can see the rows and columns. We planted with Rupert, and in this central array, 165,000 flags. But then I wanted the next 100,000 to be planted by visitors, and visitors came. They planted, some planted just one flag, some planted for hours on end. Some came and planted day after day. It truly was a public participatory art project. One of the things that people would do is come and personalize the flags. I think you saw that in that BBC segment. And that was important because during this time when people were socially distanced and things were very much shuttered, having a death happen in isolation was truly traumatizing. One of the reasons why we have such important rights around death and dying is to help in the grieving process. But when that happens, when the death happens alone, and so many of these did indeed happen alone or only with the company of a healthcare worker and an iPad, then you add on the fact that the family cannot grieve in public and that the deaths were not publicly acknowledged. That's where this art came in. We allowed people to personalize these flags, and that alone helped in the grieving process, as well having people just come and plant flags, even if they had no personal loss of a loved one. Gosh, I mean, they'd lost educational opportunities, they'd lost businesses, income, and they'd lost the chance to just get hugs from those around them. So we all brought loss to this art installation. And I think that that's one of the important parts of it too, is when people would come to the Armory ground and walk amongst these flags, they would see others doing the same thing. And indeed, the people became part of the art installation. Seeing someone else in a reflective moment or seeing someone else who's suffering pain, it is very humanizing. And that's what I wanted to do with this. There you can see.
Suzanne, I was going to ask you about the individual flags, and then when you're so focused on those individual flags and the people writing and adding photographs, but then when you take that step back and look at the sum total of the experience and you look down 5 acres of flags, can you talk about that kind of balance between addressing the individual, personal, family loss and also absorbing the empathy of hundreds of thousands of people?
Sure. One of the things that happened was there were grief groups, for instance, on Facebook. There were several grief groups where they would send in names of loved ones who they'd lost in this pandemic. And local people, local members of that grief group would come down and write the flags out and place them in one particular spot or another. And we asked them, let's spread these flags out a bit, because as people are walking through, it becomes kind of numbing to see so many individual flags. But every once in a while, if they would look down and see a name on a flag, that would bring it home. That would help them once again think about all the grief that was embodied in each flag. I mean, you had the concentric circles of grief of the family and the neighbors and the faith community and coworkers and the medical community who had worked so hard to save that person. And so when people would come, I would want them to be able, as they walked through, to see here and there, not in one space, but throughout the entire art installation, these personalized flags, because after they would look at a flag and then they would raise their gaze, that brought home, I think, to many visitors, the incredible aggregate of this grief that we were all facing and still are.
Yep. The other thing I wanted to point out was the physical, not just the emotional expense, but the physical drain of being on site each day to greet people. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of your very first chores of every day was to change the numbers on that sign, correct?
You know, forgive me, I couldn't hear the end of your question.
Oh,
but
I just asked about changing the sign, changing the
about
numbers each day.
Oh, right. Yes. As a visual artist who had created this installation, I felt it was incumbent to as well be there every day, because it wasn't just about the art, it was about receiving people's grief. As well, there's a bit of if you will, I don't want to say routine, but there is pageantry ritual surrounding the changing of the numbers. Each day I would change the number to reflect the death toll, and that became something that people would come each day to see and plant the flags. We had a lot of special visitors. You see on the left, Jose Andres, myself, Speaker Pelosi, Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. It was important to have VIP visitors to the site. And sadly enough, recently Mayor Bowser has lost her sister. One of the things you'll see in one of the next slides is, and there you see Jose Andres planting a flag. He was adorable. His flag said, "For the people of Spain." So art is up for interpretation. As you see, we came to the front of the sign and had a press conference. One of the things that I want to point out in this photo is that patch of 25 flags in front of me. It's one thing to see a whole field of flags and think, oh my God, we lost so many people in this pandemic, but it's another thing to put it in context. And I felt as a visual artist, that was important for me to do. 25 flags represents 25 deaths that have happened in New Zealand. It is now up to 26. That is the cumulative death toll for this country of 5 million. We are what, 325 or 28 million people? And so I did the math. And if we had had the same excellent testing protocol, the same quarantine procedures, and the same really public response to taking care of one another and really following the directives, we might only have had less than 2,000 deaths. You see there right in front of the sign. And I think, Aaron, if you show them this other angle, here is the sign again from the left. And you see this patch in front of it of 1,675 flags. That's how many deaths we would have had at our population level if we had success. And then look behind this 4 acres of flags. I had to do that. I had to show people that the difference, and to show them that we could do better. When I showed press came from all over the country. Some people came from New Zealand. And when they saw that patch and saw how well they'd done, they said to me, Suzanne, you know, we came here proud of being New Zealanders, but we leave even prouder. And they had a right to be. There was lots of press for this art installation, not only national press and local press, but international press. Because I did this installation at the time of our election last fall, foreign journalists were already here in abundance in the capital city. Many of them came to visit us here. one of the most poignant interactions I had was with Japanese 60 Minutes. They have their own CBS version there in Japan. And one of their senior correspondents came here, not only to report about the election, but to report about the flags. After he had done his piece for broadcast later that week, as his team was loading their cameras and their recording devices, he was standing off to the side under the trees. And so I walked over to him and just stood in silence for a minute. And then he said to me, Suzanne, I have to tell you, when I was growing up as a teenager in Tokyo, when I was 16 and 17, I loved everything about America. I loved the Beach Boys. I loved all the other music. I loved the fashion and such. And he said, I've carried that bit of America with me all these years. And he said, looking out at these flags, it crushes that. And that made me realize, you know, we are the model for the rest of the world. And the world is watching. And so I will always remember that and appreciate that interaction because it taught me a lot. I grew up knowing that America is the greatest country in the world. But in this instance, and in that moment, we were the greatest because of the number of deaths. And that was truly sobering. One of the things I would tell the press when they would come is, I hope that we can redefine what patriotism is. It's instead of wrapping ourselves in flags and demanding our individual rights, I really hope that we can redefine patriotism as caring for one another. I was pretty worried last fall when we ran out of time and space that we knew there were going to be more deaths, and I wanted a way to continue to offer people a chance to honor their loved ones in a public way, even though they would no longer be able to plant flags. That was one of the things that really concerned me. Was I got to see and talk with so many people who were grieving and who had come to personalize flags. And I knew that this had played an important role for them. And I wanted to extend that for others or to others. Luckily, I met a woman in mid-November. Her name is Dr. Sarah Wagner. She is an anthropologist at GW University. She teamed up with Dr. Adam Frashia from the University of Maryland, and they brought teams of archaeologists and anthropologists to the site. And see this flag where you see the little ribbon wrapped around it. They geolocated every personalized flag in this installation. There were 1,865 personalized flags. They located each of them, wrapped them with ribbons, and geolocated them. And with the help of Maggie Peterson there at GW University, they created a website. So throughout the winter, and still, people can go to this website in America, virtualflags.com, and they can fill out the form and dedicate a flag to a loved one. And as you see here, then they can go on and read their flag, and you can go read the flags of other people, of other families who've personalized them. I just want to make a note here that the flags are gone. The personalized ones are still with me. That is the ones that have not been accessioned to the Smithsonian. This was the Smithsonian Museum of American History now is the repository for many of the flags. And as soon as I get the paperwork finished with them, we look forward to notifying those families.
Suzanne, what will the museum do with this archive that they are creating about your work?
You know, they said it would take a year or two, but that they wanted to do an exhibition specifically addressing or recapturing the essence of this one. And I said, well, it's going to take a lot of flags and you already have storage issues. And the curator said, yes, but we have mirrors. So there's all sorts of wizardry that happens at the Smithsonian, isn't there, Betsy?
Right, that's right. Oops, how did she get in there?
Hey, Betsy, you're right on cue. I just wanted to kind of throw this in there because I thought that Bryan shared this quote earlier with his introduction, and I thought it was very moving words, inspirational on many levels, and also very fitting for the moment.
Well, so as long as you have gone this direction, I have to say I'd like to ask Suzanne to return for a minute. You mentioned that you had spent a number of years in hospice doing volunteer work with hospice people. And so one of the things that I'm aware of with this project is you have found a way to make people slow down and look and take time and reflect on this massive death experience that we have had over the last year. You know, normally death is not something we want to look at. Americans are notorious for sort of, brushing it under the carpet and moving on quickly and not commemorating in any way. You have given us, the occasion, the means, the visual impact. And do you see that somehow the experience you had with hospice was, for me, it almost looks like that's what would have prepared you to be able to do this. I'm wondering if another artist could have done it without having had that long preparation and that long experience of death that you have had.
Betsy, I think there's 2 points. I think it's my hospice experience has really helped me understand that we've got to get more comfortable with talking about death. It's so unfortunate that we have this attitude that we can't talk about it. So one of the things I would love to do is create some type of symbol that a person could wear or incorporate somehow when they're in the midst of grieving. We need to be able to tell people or let people know when we are grieving, so that people can give each other the space that is needed. Also, not only knowing that we need to be able to talk more about death, but and knowing that Americans, we knock the rearview mirrors right off our cars, right? We don't like to look back. We are not a society that looks back. And I think that it's interesting. We saw that too with the pandemic of 1918 when I was talking with the professor there at Sarah Wagner at GW University. She is working on a project called Rights in Mourning, and it's being funded by the National Science Foundation. She said, there's very little to study from the 1918 pandemic because people really did not create art around it. They did not create expansive archives about it. We aren't a society that does that, but it would help if we did. Also, some of my other art really led up to this project. You say that you're not sure how many other artists would even want to do this art. Well, my 25 years of volunteering led me to understand that deaths in other situations need to be honored as well. What you're seeing here are pictures of a piece. I have 7 art installations in the Empty Fix series. I began doing this because I had no idea about drug addiction. I wanted to understand it, so I traveled around the country and visited like maybe 23, 24 different states. I interviewed hundreds of people who are recovering or still suffering drug addiction to find out, to learn about it so I could create art to decrease the stigma. What you see here is one of those art installations. I partnered with a wonderful art therapist, Sheila Berman, on this one. This is bringing opioid and drug addiction deaths out into the open. We created this so that communities around the country can replicate it. It's called Unforgotten. And I think, Aaron, do you have that picture of it there at the Bethesda Metro? It is putting gene pockets on strands and providing them to the public along with Sharpies so that people can just come up to the art and add their own information from loved ones who've been lost to overdose deaths. When I was putting this installation up, an older gentleman came out of the nearby hotel there, and he said, "What is this art?" When I explained it to him, he said, "Can I write on one?" And I said, "Well, of course." He had lost an older cousin to drug overdose after that cousin had come back from the Vietnam War. And he said, "My family's never talked about this." And so he actually went and wrote his cousin's name on one of those gene pockets. We don't know what pain others carry. Being able to provide art that people can use to get out that grief is really therapeutic, but not just on an individual level, on a community level. There you see.
And Suzanne, I just wanted to chime in here a little bit that
Yeah.
Your kind of evolution with your public works, it has not happened overnight. I've been aware of your work for a number of years and watching you experiment with different ways of using empathy as your medium. I mean, you've worked with clay and bronze and wood and Sharpies and flags and ice, and you've used all these different materials. And there's moments where I'm like, how is she managing to weave all these together? Then what I've realized over time is that the common theme or the common material, the actual medium of your work is empathy. And so I just kind of wanted you to speak to that, your thought of sculpting empathy or shaping empathy, not just for yourself, but for the community in this kind of, I want to say like this reverberation or this engagement with the people in not just the neighborhood, but the entire city, the entire nation.
Aaron, thank you for that. The last line of my artist statement says something, and I'll paraphrase it here. It says something like, you will not recognize my art visually. You will feel it viscerally. I do the opposite of artists in certain situations. I don't concentrate on one medium and master it. What I do is I research a topic. I find a topic that matters to me, a topic that I don't understand, a topic that is roiling us as a community. And I do a deep dive so that I can understand how I might make people feel differently or think differently about it, or how I might be able to change their lens. And that is evident in many of the Empty Fix art installations. And it's also evident, for instance, in the piece that I have done called Alienable Right to Life, which is about mass shootings. Let me get back to this one for a minute, though. What you're looking at is called Eyes. It is one of the 7 Empty Fix art installations. What I realized was that, first of all, and Betsy, you should speak to this, I didn't think many people would necessarily choose to go into a museum or a gallery to see art regarding drug addiction. So I wanted at least one of my 7 installations to be out in the public where people would just come across it. So when I was interviewing people, I took pictures of their eyes, added those photos to glass blocks with a resin process, and I display them in fountains and reflecting pools so that people will just come upon them. There you see a picture from the Utah State Capitol fountain. The concept here is simple. We'll walk right past someone who's slumped over on the sidewalk from addiction, giving them wide berth. But we're socialized to never walk past someone who's drowning. And what I've come to learn is that addiction really is like drowning. So I wanted to do this art installation so that people could change their emotional response to those who are suffering. It, in a way, imbues in them a bit of responsibility for that person.
So what I love about this piece is the way that you have found a physical way to make that point. It's all well and good to have a wonderful idea about some issue in our world or our society today, but to be able to render it in physical form that communicates clearly and directly and without too much verbiage and explanation is really a gift. And it's always different with you. I mean, you never do the same thing twice, but each time you find some actual physically evocative way to make your point. It's, it is part of the power of the work.
Well, Betsy, isn't that the power of art, really, especially visual art,
I guess,
when words go unheard?
But sometimes art can get very abstract or very minimal or very cerebral. And it then sort of narrows down the audience to, a rare few. You have a gift for finding a physical method of engaging everybody kind of in the space where they live.
Why, thank you. I think one of the things you're responding to is the fact that I try to make beautiful pieces. I like to lure people in with the aesthetics and then gently hit them over the head with the message. And I think the eyes do that. And there's a few other pieces. Updraft America, I do that as well.
So
Here
did you
see
get
me.
permissions for all those people when you photographed their eyes?
So,
Did they
okay,
give you
all
permissions?
All lawyers on this call, could you please to leave for a minute? If I were to get, it was very difficult to get permission. I began by providing all these sheets where people would need to sign their consent form and provide their name and address, and it wasn't really happening. People just wouldn't participate. So as you see here, I love this picture because I actually got a board and wrote on it the consent form, and I made them read it with me, and the consent was on both sides. And so I would take a photo of them first with the board so I could confirm that they had possession of that board. And then I would go and take another picture with just their eyes. Two quick things about, so I mean,
problem solving.
What?
Problem solving.
Well, I mean, a couple quick stories. One of my first situations, I went to a soup kitchen and I went in there and the person who was managing it introduced me. She announced me and said that I would be taking pictures, and half the people got up and left. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be more of a challenge than I thought. And I asked a person who worked there why, and she said, those are the undocumented people. So you have to understand that certain people just won't want to be involved. Interestingly, I would say that about 95% of the people whom I approached for this Empty Fix project wanted to participate. These are people who feel that their lives have little value. And when I explained to them that their participation in my art could help people better understand drug addiction and could help lessen the stigma, they were like all in. So I was really pleased about that. One other quick thing about the eyes. Sorry to do this to you, Erin. As an artist, we never truly understand what our art will be like until it's actually in place. And so could you show one of those shots of the eyes in situ in water?
Yes.
When I first put the eyes in water, I believe it was at the Utah State Fountain, and I was aghast because by taking pictures of the eyes and putting them in water, what I had done was, as an artist, I had silenced them. And that wasn't really what I wanted to do, but it's very evocative, right, Betsy? So sometimes what you think has gone wrong maybe isn't as bad.
Well, it also was not your only way of addressing this issue. It was one of 6 or 7 installations that you did.
Right. I think, Erin, you were popping up the addict one.
Right. Are you guys ready for that? I don't want to rush you.
Shall we?
Yep.
Let's look at that. One of the things I did was I took recordings of people's voices. I took the pictures of the eyes. I had them write on note cards, and I had them answer certain questions. And that really helped me. It gave me my material to create this art installation. But one of the things I needed to do was first address the word addict, because when I would go to treatment centers, they would caution me. And in fact, at one treatment center, they actually gave me a handout that said, you must not use the word addict here. You must use the word substance, what is it? Substance misuse disorder sufferer, right? And I was like, what is with this? These are people who often will go to an NA meeting or an AA meeting. They'll raise their hand and they'll say, hi, I'm Suzanne and I'm an addict. So I thought, by avoiding the word, aren't we really further stigmatizing it? What we should do is democratize the word so that if we all feel that we have in some way, some measure of addiction, we're better able to have empathy. And so that's what I do with this installation. What you're looking at are 6 different TV sets that are stood on their side and placed behind aluminum frames. So through the word addict, you see 6 different vignettes showing different ways in which we are all addicts. Here you see gaming. Before you saw smoking. I hope Erin does not show you the porn. There is a segment on eating. There is food. And this is my favorite. This is the last one about cell phones, because if nothing else, I think most of us are guilty about our relationship with technology. There's the shopping one. So this is just a different way to once again use art to address the issue of stigma and indeed language and how we use it.
Suzanne, I want to just jump in here, bringing my students through the space and them experiencing this in real life. You guys aren't getting the full video experience, but this is, a 5 or 10 minute video montage that's cycling through. But what's so thoughtful is that even the parts that don't have imagery are still beautiful. If you look at this value transition in the Word Addict, there are these subtle kind of touches and attention to detail within the transitions in the videos that are really compelling. So this is one of those works that I really struggled with how to present today. And I feel like the audience is getting a taste of it, but there's nothing that compares to seeing this in real life.
Betsy, let me ask you a quick question about this, because when this was presented, and by the way, I want to share with you all, the last of the 7 art installations was just finished at the beginning of the pandemic. So 5 of these 7 installations have not been provided to the public or have not been in the public purview. So this is really a preview for you of this art. Betsy, I was going to ask you a quick question about the word itself, addict. I did this because of the power of the word, and I wanted to minimize the power of that word. In art, like, how far can art go really in changing behavior of people? Or am I just dreaming here?
So it's a big question. A lot of people have thought and written a lot about it. My own personal view is that you can have an enormous impression with an artwork once you see it and it penetrates, it can stay with you a lifetime. So that, just to use a common example, you sometimes walk around the neighborhood and you see a site or a tree or whatever, and you go, oh, that reminds me of that tree by Dürer, or, so it can penetrate your consciousness in a way that never leaves you. I'm not as optimistic that it will change your behavior, but it may reframe your understanding of yourself enough to help downstream. I guess I don't think art is, I'm not as big on the idea that it's directly therapeutic, but it definitely does shape your consciousness, and it helps modify your view of who you are, and it makes you think harder. So yes, it could, of course, lead to change. I just don't think it's a direct one-to-one, like go view the art and then you're going to change your behavior.
Right. Well, here's one that I hope will change behavior. If we can get school boards and heads of schools and funders to go through this particular artwork. This screen is just reiterating that I went to interviewed hundreds of people. I actually bought a shipping container. Jack Rasmussen suggested that I put this in a shipping container, and he was right. What I did when I was going throughout the country interviewing people, I would ask them various questions. One of the first questions I would ask is, well, how did you become addicted? And pretty quickly, a person disabused me of the notion that that was a valuable question. He said, Suzanne, it doesn't matter what door a person comes into the addiction circus tent. It matters why they're there. And so instead of asking people, how use got them into addiction, I began to ask why. What is keeping a person addicted? And so often, as you can see in that right panel, it's in the left panel. When people are suffering from drug addiction, they often mention instances of psychological pain, bullying, abuse, neglect, trauma, isolation, social isolation. And it made me realize, we as Americans are very focused on physical safety of children. And we spend, as that said, over $1 billion a year on things that you're going to see here. This is the tunnel that you walk through when you go through this shipping container from end to end. It's an overwhelming expanse of safety gates, hockey pads, bike helmets, booster seats, car seats. We are so focused on the physical safety. And I wanted to do art to make people realize that we've got to become more focused on the ramifications of psychological injury. So as a person who's walking through this installation, and forgive me, I don't have a video right now that represents this experience in totality. As you're walking through this, I've hidden 7 speakers throughout, and you're hearing voices of kids saying, the kids were so mean in middle school, or I didn't know who I was. My parents divorced and I had to be 2 separate people. Or one woman, young lady, her message was, I was sexually, physically, and emotionally abused from the ages of 3 to 8, and my father was a high-ranking military officer. You know, we really need to focus more on keeping kids psychologically safe. So that's what this art is about, and that's why I want to get more people to actually be able to go into my shipping container, and that's why I call it Protect Them.
Hey, Suzanne, that just reminded me of one of the students this past week who experienced this in the virtual field trip. And I believe her question to you, you can help me, I might paraphrase it, but it was something to the effect of, how do you maintain your own light when you're addressing such darkness in this work?
Well, when the student asked that question, and you did a good job of paraphrasing it, Erin, I was bowled over. I mean, Bryan, there's some kind of magic that happens at Sidwell, because this was a very insightful question from a middle schooler. And it gave me pause. At first, I said, oh, well, you know, I'm an optimistic person, and my worldview is that people are essentially good. And so that keeps me able to float on top of dark waters. But then I realized that there's a much deeper way of responding to that question. It has to do with the fact that without darkness, we can't value the light. In fact, and Betsy, you should help me here. Indeed, without darkness, there is no such thing as light, and vice versa. And I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that, the value of the darkness, and being able to know that there is light there.
Well, all the philosophers say, you know, there's no way to go through life and avoid sorrow or sadness. One needs to accept it and learn from it and integrate it. You know, there's no way to pretend it's not going to happen to you. And so coming to grips with that, facing it squarely, understanding it, making it part of your life, learning from it, learning how to move with it and beyond it, I think is crucial. And that's what you're doing here. I mean, I remember going through this myself and going, whoa, you know, it's just a powerful physical thing when you're there. As I say, I love the fact that you make these artworks so physically emphatic. And moving through this container is just an experience. I hope everybody gets to do it. With everything opening up, you should have a line at the door here.
When I first did that piece and I walked through it for the first time when the audio was up and running, that was the first time when I, as an artist, knew that I had realized my ambition to impart that information.
That's good.
Hey, Suzanne, we might have to give another shout out to Jack Rasmussen, because I believe you exhibited this work, the Updraft America, at American University in 2016.
Indeed, I did it right before the 2016 presidential election. For those who don't know, I used to work on Capitol Hill for a very short time. I worked as an aide and the special assistant in the US Senate. And so I was familiar with the publication they use. the congressional record, which is the codification of everything that happens on the House and Senate floor. So there you go, that's my mailbox. I ordered a year's subscription to it. And each time one of those packets would come, I would tear it apart and create from each page a paper airplane. I striped these airplanes red or blue to connote the parties, the warring parties, and installed them at American University in imposing bins. Those that rose up and crossed the political divide would have their blue and red combine to become purple, and then they would fly out of the museum. I was inspired to do this because there was yet another threatened government shutdown in 2015, and I thought, this is the perfect way for an artist to show one's, outrage might be too big of a word, but if our congressional delegations were our employees and got so little done, I don't think they'd still be working for us if we thought of them as such. I mentioned earlier that I like to do art. If you could go back to that slide for just 1 minute, Erin, one more point about this. I like to do art that draws people in with the aesthetics. And I think you see that here. It's intriguing from a distance because you think, oh, what are these things flying around? And then as people near this piece, they see that it's the congressional record and the message hits home. Here's another piece that you look at it from a distance and you don't know what it is. This is called Alienable Right. This is my piece that addresses mass shootings. We talk all the time about our Second Amendment rights, our right to bear arms. What we don't talk is the juxtaposition of the Second Amendment in the Constitution with the Declaration of Independence, because that is our document in which is enumerated our inalienable right to life. That was a natural right that our forefathers felt that we really needed and we were justified in getting, and we had to break away from England to ensure this right, among others. So I wanted to put those two in psychological juxtaposition. These people, and if you look at the corner there, you can see that this American flag is composed of the names of mass shooting victims in the United States, beginning with Columbine. I wanted to juxtapose that because here we have the Second Amendment in direct conflict with the alienable right to life. And I think a lot of people don't see it that way. So I, as an artist, wanted to physically position them in this manner. This was first exhibited 2 years ago, 2019 in Washington, DC. And that afternoon, as we were all standing around drinking our Chardonnay and looking at this and other pieces of art, cell phones started buzzing. And someone came up to me and said, Suzanne, I've got to tell you, there was just a mass shooting. That was the El Paso shooting, the Walmart. And later that night, then we had the Dayton shooting. So that is one of my artworks that will never be done. This, I'm happy to say, is an artwork that is finished. Let's hope it stays finished. Forgive me, but this is my rendition of Edvard Munch's The Scream. I copied his pastel version that was sold, I think, in 2013 for a record-breaking price and is now in private hands. I use this iconic image as therapy for me as those darkest days of the pandemic were setting in early on. I created this from Donald Trump quotations. All the color here is really words, and all those words have been uttered by our prior president. The sky begins with complaints about the inauguration size in 2017. The two figures you see here on the right, on the left, those were two March pandemic press conferences. I took out all the words except the adjectives and adverbs and just used the hyperbole, the presidential hyperbole, to create those figures. To the right of this main figure, you see green roiling water. That is mainly housing complaints about the press. The sidewalk and the railing are a COVID timeline. Here you can see on the right, if you look in the orange, you'll see January 22nd. And the quote was, "We have it totally under control." The last quotation comes from, I think the last mention of a figure was 90,000. but I ran out of space to continue doing it. And so I completed it, I believe, in late June. One I spells stable, the other I spells genius. And trust me, your favorite quotes are there. This work was predicated on an earlier work I did. This is a copy of Paul Cadmus's Nude. This was a figure, a drawing of Lena Anderson, his 30-year companion or partner. I wrote it from the writ of certiorari and the testimony in the case Windsor, the Supreme Court case that was dealing with Edith Windsor. She was trying to break down Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act. So you can see the tie-in here. I'm honoring an artist who had a 30-year committed gay relationship with language that began to break down the social, emotional, and legal barriers to such. There's a companion piece that goes with this. And in that, there it is. That is created, not with line drawing, but just with words. And that is the decision in that Supreme Court case.
Hey Suzanne, I'm going to kind of start shifting gears a little bit because we have some questions coming from the audience. However, I did want to, I just thought this was a nice kind of elegant slide to start the Q&A with.
Look at, there he is. You see a picture of him and he's right here.
Right, that's the back of the sculpture that is behind you in your Zoom camera.
Right.
But I've got a couple of softball questions for you from the audience. One is, I'm wondering how long it took you to plant the flags on the original installation in October and November.
I love softball questions. Thank you. It took 3 days. We started planting on a Monday, and by Thursday afternoon, we were done planting the initial array of 165,000. But then over the course of the next 6 weeks, I had the public continue to help me plant flags so that we would catch up to that cumulative death count. And then each day we continued to add the prior days. So while the initial one was 3 days, it really took the entire length of the exhibition. And I appreciated that it was going to take us a long time because that gave the public a chance to really make it their art.
The next question is actually a little trickier because I remember when we did our field trip in November, I wasn't really expecting you to have time for us because you were dealing with so many visitors and contractors and electricians trying to get everything working. But the question here is, when you were on site in terms of meeting with people, not just interacting emotionally, but just like your work day, how long were you on site each day over the course of a work week?
So on the weekdays, we would start about 11 a.m. because I had people helping me man the desks. And I would go until sunset. On weekends, it was 9 a.m. to sunset. I was there most all those hours. I was there every day, rain or shine. And I should say pouring rain or shine too. I wanted to be there for people to hear their stories and also to knit together groups of people. So often, if I was talking with someone and somebody else came by, I would get their names, I would introduce them, and really just knit them into the community. And we really became a community. People came there over and over again.
And so this is an excellent question. I'm going to read it slowly, make sure I get it right. How do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement has played into the public nature of your COVID installations? I'm thinking of this in relation to the 1918 pandemic, when the world was embroiled in global conflict and governments wanted to hide any mass illness.
I'll take a stab at that, and then I'd love to hear Betsy's response to it. Oftentimes at the site, I would tell people that this was in a way, respectfully, in part, my Black Lives Matter art installation. Because part of the initiative in doing it, part of the inspiration for doing it, was that those lives were being devalued. And so that made it even more important to have one flag for every person. But Betsy, I'd love to hear more about like the general realm.
I think you basically said it. It is not one thing or the other, it's both. You know, we're going through a time when the value of a life is somehow almost daily called into question. Certainly during the 1918 pandemic, you know, we were just on the brink of this huge world war. There were people all around the world dying in droves. The whole question of how disease and illness plays into these larger constructs of war or whatever. It's a challenge, but yeah, I think you just basically said it. I mean, the value of a life is something to reflect on, whether it's individually when you're in hospice with someone, or whether it's a Black Lives Matter protest, or whether it's a war, or whether it's a COVID. I mean, the real problem with COVID is there is no way to say it's in the service of a larger cause. At least when you die in a war, you can tell yourself or your family or hope to believe that it was in the service of a larger cause. May not always be true, but that's how we like to frame it. You know, with COVID, it just feels like pure negative. It feels like pure loss. And I think that makes it really, really hard. And to know that it has a disproportionate impact in communities of color, you know, it only deepens the feeling of why, you know, why is this happening, and why is no one doing anything? So, you know, I don't mean no one's doing anything. Lots of people are doing lots of things, but you sometimes feel as if it's a situation without end or recourse. So,
and I think there's no American today who would have guessed a year ago that we would be sitting here and talking about 576,000 deaths.
Well, and of course, in 1918, we lost 675,000, but the population was a fraction the size. Wow. So, you know, we may still hit that number again.
True.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but as usual, I've kept my class too long. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn things back over to Bryan to make some closing remarks. But before that, I just wanted to express some gratitude, Betsy, to you and also to Suzanne for really making this such a treat for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you, Erin. And thanks, Betsy.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to all of you. It was a really wonderful evening, terrific conversation, as we knew it would be. And I want to express my deepest gratitude to the Rubensteins and to Suzanne, Elizabeth, and Erin for the great work that you've done here to make this possible for all of us to enjoy. I was very moved by so many moments in the presentation, but especially Suzanne, when you said that we need to make patriotism about looking out for each other. It's not up to Biden, it's up to each one of us. And I thought that really resonated, well, it did really resonate with me. And when you think about, Elizabeth, the power of art to have an impact on our behavior, it's up to us as to whether or not the art will have an impact on us and whether we will listen to that plea that was made by Suzanne. It reminded me of an event that I attended last night for the school, which was the community iftar, as many of our Muslim families were breaking their fast. We heard also from an imam from Montgomery County, who was talking about the difference between high politics and what he calls personal politics. And the high politics have to do with how we develop a virus and or a vaccine rather, and how we distribute a vaccine. It has to do with the Second Amendment, as you were talking about, Elizabeth, but the low politics have to do with how we treat one another. And that if we are going to make an impact on our society, we need to work in both realms. And we have the responsibility and the opportunity each and every day to make a difference in someone's lives. by someone's life by extending to them the kind of compassion and empathy that you try to extend to us, Suzanne, through your art. So we are really, I just have the deepest of gratitude and for your vision, for the provocative nature of your work, for the grace with which you deliver it. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank
Friends,
you so much.
if we could gather and end our presentation again with gratitude to all involved with a moment of shared silence. Thank you, friends.